My fiancée told me to cancel our honeymoon because her ex needed emotional support that week. And what unsettled me was not the request itself, but the calm way she said it, as if she had already decided my answer for me. Her name was Camille Waverly. Mine was Adrian Mercer. We were 6 weeks away from a wedding in Greenwich, Connecticut. The seating chart had been approved. The band had been paid. My mother had already started practicing her expression for the rehearsal dinner, so she would not look too emotional in photographs. Camille stood in our kitchen with one hand around a glass of sparkling water and the other resting lightly on the marble counter, as if she were discussing a florist adjustment. "Julian is going through something serious," she said. Julian Hargrove was the ex. He was not ancient history. He was not a harmless old chapter. He was the kind of former boyfriend who never fully left a room, even when he was not in it. He had been her boyfriend through college, through her first job in Manhattan, and through the stage of life when people start confusing familiarity with destiny. According to Camille, they had ended 2 years earlier because they had become different people. According to everyone else, they had ended because Julian could not decide whether he wanted Camille, his company, or the attention of anyone willing to admire his ambition. I kept my voice level. Why would our honeymoon have anything to do with Julian? She looked at me with that composed expression I had once mistaken for maturity, because he asked if I could be available that week. Available for what? He's not doing well emotionally. I waited. That answer should have been enough for someone, but not for the man expected to postpone an international trip after paying for it. Camille sighed, as if my confusion were already becoming work for her. His divorce got uglier than expected. He's been having panic episodes. He said I'm the only person who knows how to calm him down. I stared at her for a moment and felt something inside me go still. Not hot, not loud. Still, that kind of silence inside your own chest can be more dangerous than anger, because it means your mind has already started rearranging the truth. I asked the obvious question, "And you told him yes before asking me?" She set the glass down. I told him I would try. I nodded slowly. "No." She blinked. It was a small reaction, but it was real. Not outrage. Not pain. Surprise. As if the word itself did not fit the script she had built before walking into the kitchen. "No," she repeated. "No." I said again. "We are not canceling our honeymoon, so you can emotionally manage another man." A hard line came into her face. "That's a very cold way to frame it." "That's a very soft way to frame it," I said. For a few seconds, she looked almost embarrassed. Then the embarrassment vanished, and something more familiar replaced it. Moral superiority. That was Camille's favorite defense when reality failed to support her. She moved to the window and folded her arms. "You know what I think is interesting? That you're making this about territory when someone is clearly struggling." I leaned back against the island. "I think what's interesting is that you just told your fiancé to make a financial and emotional sacrifice for the comfort of your ex. And you expected me to see compassion instead of disrespect." She laughed once, very softly. There was no joy in it. "Julian is not a threat to you, Adrian. That's not the standard." "Then what is?" "The standard is whether the woman I'm about to marry understands the difference between empathy and inappropriate loyalty." She turned around then, fully. "I'm not abandoning someone in a crisis just because you're insecure." That word landed between us like a tool she had used before. Insecure. It is one of the cleanest weapons in modern relationships. It turns boundaries into weakness. It turns discomfort into defect. It allows the person crossing a line to sound evolved while they do it. I said nothing for a moment because I wanted to answer carefully. My answer would be the same if it were my ex. "That doesn't make you noble," she said. "It makes you rigid." I almost smiled. No one likes a boundary until it blocks their own convenience. Our honeymoon was supposed to be 2 weeks in Italy. Lake Como first, then Florence. We had planned it around a break in my firm's litigation calendar and a gap in Camille's work with her mother's foundation. The trip was not just symbolic. It had taken coordination, time, money. And underneath all of that was the unspoken assumption every engaged couple depends on, that both people are moving toward the same life. That night Camille slept in the guest room. Not after shouting, not after theatrics. She simply picked up her charger, her silk sleep shirt, and her resentment and walked down the hall like a woman withdrawing cooperation. I stayed in our room and stared at the ceiling for nearly an hour. What bothered me most was not Julian. It was how quickly Camille had made me the obstacle. I had not heard panic in her voice. I had heard inconvenience. And inconvenience, I was beginning to understand, was how she categorized any reality that interfered with her need to remain central in every crisis she touched. The next morning, she was pleasant. That almost made it worse. She asked if I wanted coffee. She mentioned a vendor email. She kissed the air near my cheek before leaving for a meeting in Midtown. People think relational instability always arrives with slammed doors and broken dishes. Sometimes it arrives in elegant tones and well-managed facial expressions. Sometimes it wears cream cashmere and asks whether you still want oat milk from the market. Over the next week, the subject did not disappear. It evolved. Camille brought Julian up the way people test a locked door. Gently, repeatedly. He's had a terrible month. I just feel responsible, in a human sense. You're so good in every other area, and I wish you could see this less defensively. That last one almost impressed me. There's a certain talent in telling a person they're nearly perfect right before asking them to betray their own instincts. I did not change my answer. I also did not escalate. That seemed to irritate her more than anger would have. A fight would have allowed her to cast me as emotional. My calm forced her to stand alone with what she was actually asking. One Friday evening, we had dinner with her parents at the Belhaven Club. Her father, Charles Waverly, was a controlled man with the kind of wealth that no longer needs performance. Her mother, Eleanor, was precise in every possible way. Camille arrived 20 minutes late. She blamed traffic. Her father glanced at his watch and let it pass. At one point, Eleanor asked whether we were excited for Italy. Camille took a sip of wine before answering. I may need to adjust the dates slightly. Her mother looked up. Adjust the honeymoon. Camille gave a faint shrug. Julian's going through a difficult period. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was better than dramatic. It was informative. Charles Waverly did not look at me first. He looked at his daughter. That told me he understood the problem immediately. Eleanor did look at me, not with sympathy, with calculation, as if she were trying to measure how much composure I had left. Charles cut into his halibut. And why would Julian's emotional health determine your honeymoon? Camille exhaled through her nose. Because unlike some people, I don't discard human beings the second a relationship changes shape. Her father set down his fork. That is not what he asked. Something sharp flashed across her face. For the first time that evening, I felt less alone. She had expected resistance from me. She had not expected it from inside her own system. On the drive home, she was furious. Not loud at first. Cold. You enjoyed that. No, I said. I noticed it. She looked out the window. My father has never understood emotional complexity. I kept my eyes on the road. I don't think this is complexity. I think this is misplaced devotion. She turned toward me. You really need to stop acting like Julian is some kind of obsession. I said nothing. Then she made the mistake that changed everything. If you trusted me, this wouldn't threaten you. Trust is a dangerous word when spoken by someone who treats it like a tax you owe them. I asked quietly, what exactly am I being asked to trust? That you know where my heart is. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me feel tired. Because when someone answers a practical question with a poetic one, they're usually avoiding the truth. Before we go further, tell me honestly in the comments what you would have done here. Would you have treated this like a misunderstanding worth fixing? Or would you have seen it as a warning that the marriage itself was built on unstable ground? The following Monday, I had lunch with my older sister, Caroline Mercer, in the city. Caroline had the rare family talent of telling the truth without dressing it up as kindness. She listened all the way through. Then she buttered a piece of bread and said, "This isn't about the ex." I almost laughed. That's what everyone says when it is obviously about the ex. She shook her head. No, it's about Camille needing to remain necessary. I looked at her. Caroline continued. Some people confuse being needed with being loved. They keep old emergencies alive because a quiet relationship feels invisible to them. That stayed with me. Not because it fully explained Camille, because it explained something I had been feeling without naming. There had always been a strange energy around her generosity. It was real, but it often came with an audience. She did not just want to help. She wanted to matter in a way that could be seen. That afternoon, I called the travel service. The flights were partly refundable. The hotel reservations could be changed with penalties. The private guide in Florence was non-refundable. I did not cancel anything. I simply wanted facts. Facts are grounding. Facts stop emotions from pretending they're the only evidence available. Later that evening, Camille came home later than usual. She looked exhausted, but not in the way work exhausts you. She looked emotionally spent, as if she had been performing for hours. We had barely spoken when her phone lit up on the counter. She was upstairs changing. I did not touch it. I only glanced because the screen was face up. The message preview was from Sloane Pembroke, her maid of honor. It read, "He cannot find out about the bridge documents before the wedding." My body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with jealousy. When Camille came downstairs, I was still standing in the kitchen. She knew immediately that something had shifted. What? I asked a simple question. What bridge documents? Her expression changed too fast. First blankness, then annoyance, then the careful neutrality of someone realizing the easy lie will not survive. That was private. That was visible. She pulled out a chair and sat down, which told me she needed strategy. It's not what you think. No, I said. It's usually worse. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she made a choice. Not honesty. Partial honesty. The kind people offer when they believe controlled disclosure can still save the structure. Julian's company had been in trouble for months. Not headline trouble. Cash flow trouble. The kind that wealthy families sometimes cover quietly because public failure is considered vulgar. Camille had loaned him money. Not a small amount. A six-figure amount from an investment account set up by her grandfather. I felt the room narrow around us. You gave your ex 6 figures. It was a bridge loan. You hid it from me. I was going to fix it before the wedding. That line sat between us like a confession disguised as intention. She kept talking. Julian was trying to close a deal. If the deal went through, the money would be returned. If not, there were personal guarantees. She had signed one. There it was. The truth beneath the honeymoon. The emotional support was not emotional support. Or not only that. It was risk management. It was guilt. It was entanglement wearing softer language. And what does our honeymoon week have to do with that? I asked. Camille pressed her fingers together. He's meeting with investors in Aspen that week. He wanted me there because I know the financial history. Histoire de hair. You were going to Aspen with your ex during our honeymoon. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? It was complicated. I laughed then, but there was no humor in it. Complicated is what people say when the honest version sounds indefensible. She stood up. You're acting like I cheated on you. I met her eyes. I'm acting like the woman I was about to marry kept a financial and emotional alliance with her ex, concealed it, and then tried to make me feel morally small for objecting. She said nothing. That silence was my answer. The next day, I called my attorney. Not because I wanted to punish Camille, because I needed to understand exposure. We had not merged assets yet, but the wedding contract had overlapping payments. There was also a draft of our post-marital planning agreement sitting in a folder that suddenly felt less romantic and more prophetic. Then I did something Camille would have called extreme. I asked to meet Julian. He agreed almost immediately. We met at the terrace restaurant of a hotel in Midtown. Julian Hargrove was exactly the kind of man women describe as intense when they still want to leave room for the possibility that intensity is depth. He was handsome in a polished, tired way. Expensive watch, sleep-deprived eyes, carefully casual posture. He ordered black coffee and got straight to it. Camille told me you're upset. That's one word, I said. He nodded, as though that were fair. What exactly did she tell you? He hesitated. That was useful. Then he said that she might need to delay your trip because things are unstable on my side. I kept my face still. Did you ask her to cancel her honeymoon? His eyes narrowed slightly. No, I'll let the silence do its work. He leaned back. I asked if she could review some materials in Aspen. After your trip, if necessary. I watched him carefully. Did you tell her she was the only person who could emotionally support you? He looked genuinely embarrassed. I told her I was overwhelmed. That's not the same thing. There are moments when betrayal becomes even more insulting because it was not even coordinated well. Julian was not innocent. He had accepted her help. He had benefited from her loyalty. He may even have enjoyed the access to her attention. But this specific crisis had been enlarged by Camille. Not invented, expanded, shaped, adjusted until it justified what she wanted to do anyway. I asked one final question. Are you in love with her? He looked down at the table before answering. No. Then he added something I did not expect. But she still feels responsible for the version of me she remembers. That line followed me all the way home. Not because it came from a good man, because it came from an honest one. By the time Camille walked through the door that evening, I had already made my decision. I was sitting in the library with our wedding folder open on the coffee table. She looked from the folder to my face. What did you do? Interesting question. Now what are you thinking? Now can we talk? What did you do? I spoke to the planner. Her jaw tightened. You had no right. I had every right. I told her the wedding is postponed. Camille stared at me as if I had set fire to the house. You postponed our wedding without my agreement? Yes. You do not get to drag me into a legal and emotional arrangement while I'm still discovering hidden liabilities and secret loyalties. Her eyes filled, but I could not tell whether it was grief, rage, or humiliation. Maybe all three. You are overreacting. That word no longer works here. She stepped closer. This is salvageable. I believe that she believed that. That was part of the tragedy. People like Camille often think relationships break because the other person is unwilling to move on. They rarely understand that sometimes the break happens much earlier in the moment trust becomes information management. I said it as gently as I could. I don't think you know how to leave a door closed. She flinched, not dramatically, just enough. For the first time since all of this began, she looked less offended than seen. Then she said something quiet and devastating. If I let people collapse, I feel cruel. I answered just as quietly. And if you keep rescuing them, you make room for them inside every future you ask someone else to build with you. That was the closest we came to real truth. Not accusation, not defense. Truth. The wedding postponement became public within 48 hours because wealthy families treat privacy the way smaller people treat weather. Everyone talks about it while pretending to respect it. My mother told relatives that there were financial matters to resolve. Eleanor Waverly called me once and asked whether there was any path forward. I told her not while the facts were still moving. Charles Waverly sent a short note that said only, "You were right to insist on clarity." Camille moved into her parents' guest house for a while. I stayed in the townhouse. The ring came back by courier in a small dark box that requires signature. That detail nearly made me laugh. Even endings had procedures in our world. A week later, the date of our honeymoon arrived. I went anyway, not because it felt triumphant, not because I wanted to make a statement, because too much of my life had already been reorganized around someone else's unfinished business. I changed the reservations, cut the trip shorter, spent 3 days in Lake Como alone. It was not cinematic. It was quiet. I slept more than I expected. I walked along the water. I read depositions by the pool because habit is stubborn. On the second evening, I sat outside a small restaurant and watched 2 older people share a bottle of wine with the ordinary ease that only comes from long-built trust. Nothing about them looked dramatic. And that, strangely, was the thing that moved me. Love should not always feel like an emergency room with expensive shoes. When I returned, there were still practical matters. Refunds, contract losses, awkward calls, one shared art purchase to divide. The tedious architecture of an unwedding. Camille and I met one final time in September. Not to reconcile, to close things with some dignity. We met at a quiet cafe in New Canaan. She looked thinner, softer somehow, less armored. Julian's deal had failed. The loan had not been fully recovered. Her father had stepped in to stabilize the exposure, though not without conditions. Julian had entered treatment for anxiety and substance misuse. They were not together. I believed her when she said that. She stirred her tea and looked at the window. I keep replaying the first time you said no. I waited. She gave a sad smile. I think I knew right then that I wasn't ready to marry anyone. That was one of the few things she said that did not feel designed. I wasn't asking for trust, she added. I was asking for permission. That line earned my respect more than any apology could have. I told her the truth in return. I did love you. She nodded. I know, but I started losing faith long before I lost affection. She closed her eyes briefly. I know that too. When we stood to leave, there was no performance. No lingering touch. No grand regret. Just two people who had nearly built a life together and then discovered, in time, that one of them was still emotionally furnishing rooms for the past. Before the story ends, I want your honest read on it. Was Adrian right to postpone everything the moment the hidden money and Aspen trip came out? Or should he have separated the secrecy from the possibility that Camille was simply trapped in an old pattern she had never learned to break? I saw Camille once more after that, at a charity event in December. Across a crowded room, she was speaking to an older donor with her usual grace, but there was less performance in her now. Or maybe I was no longer standing close enough to be affected by it. I nodded. She nodded back, and that was enough. The truth is, the honeymoon was never really the issue. Neither was the ex. The issue was that I was being asked to enter a marriage where loyalty was negotiable, transparency was delayed until necessary, and boundaries were treated like character flaws. People often imagine the most dangerous betrayal is the loud kind. It usually is not. Usually it is elegant, reasonable, articulate. Usually it arrives in language that sounds compassionate until you notice that all the compassion points outward and all the cost points toward you. I did not lose a wife. I lost a future that had been marketed beautifully and built carelessly. There is grief in that, but there is also relief. And sometimes relief is the more honest form of healing.